You're overreacting, Mr. Draven. No one kidnapped your son. We simply enacted Clause 13F to encourage compliance. That's what Marilyn Cordwin, president of the Crimson Hollow Reserve HOA, said to my face standing there on the clubhouse steps, sunlight bouncing off her laminated badge, holding my kid's backpack like it was a parking ticket. Her voice was almost gentle, like she expected me to thank her for temporarily reassigning my 10-year-old son to some undisclosed location without telling me, or the cops, clipboard tucked under her arm like a gavel. She had on that same cream suit she always wore to compliance reviews, only this time her badge said Community Custodial Officer. I've never even seen that role on an org chart. You call this encouragement? I asked, nodding at the empty space where Orrin should have been. She smiled like I was being dramatic. He's safe. When you complete the surrender forms for your equipment and grant HOA access to your network ports, you'll be eligible for reunification. What she didn't realize, what she couldn't know, is the biometric system she used to lock me out of my own home still reports to a firmware node I built back before I walked away from the agency that commissioned it. An orange signal still pings back to my server. Subscribe now if you believe no HOA should ever hold a child hostage for compliance because I had 36 hours before the system wiped all trace of his location. After that, not even the Reaper could find him. That's what they used to call me. Not because I was dangerous, but because I always showed up before it was too late. Named Silas Draven. 15 years in counter-extortion for a now-defunct federal division you won't find in any Senate budget. My job: extract hostages before the clock ran out, bunkers, yachts, palaces, you name it. After my wife died, I left all that and tried to live quiet. Crimson Hollow was supposed to be safe, neutral. Sure, there were rules, but I could live with rules until the HOA decided those rules meant full access to my devices, weekly signal audits, and penalties for operating a forensics lab behind shielding. Shielding that keeps our house dark on the grid, keeps Orrin from waking up every time a drone passes. When they threatened fines, I ignored them. When they escalated, I appealed. But when they took my son, that's when they crossed a line. They used an expired policy clause 13F to justify what they called a corrective holding procedure. But let's not sugarcoat it. They kidnapped my son, just did it with a rule book and a smile. And the worst part, they figured I'd fall in line like every other parent around here. They didn't know who I was, what I could still do. You want to know the real mistake Marilyn made? She took the astrolabe Orrin and I built after his mother's funeral. His compass. His promise that no matter what, he could always find his way home. Now it was sitting in an evidence bin under Marilyn's desk. When you steal my son and take the last thing tying him to his mother, you don't just trigger a parent. You trigger a past you're not trained to survive. So no, Marilyn didn't just break a rule. She started a countdown she couldn't stop. Where are you watching from? Because after this, every HOA is going to know never try to ransom a child from the Reaper. I didn't go home. I walked past the sidewalk cameras down the South Trail, the one behind the retention wall where the HOA sensors had blind spots. I'd mapped them weeks ago, not because I planned anything, just old habits. My boots crunched on the gravel, but inside I was ice. Orrin wasn't just missing, he was hidden under a fake administrative pretense. Nobody else panicked. The Marnells waved with their golden retriever. Normal right. In Crimson Hollow, normal meant submission dressed as safety compliance badges, ornamental plant inspections, QR-coded trash bins. I tolerated it for Orrin's sake, thinking grief needed stillness. What a joke. But this wasn't harmless. This was surveillance with a smile. And somewhere in that, Marilyn carved out her own little kingdom where a kid could be held for his protection without a warrant or consequence. I found the utility panel buried in the rocks, checked the lock still tied to the HOA clubhouse firmware. My son was still inside the perimeter. Marilyn hadn't cut the node yet. That bought me time. I closed up and moved north back toward the community square. That place is supposed to look like a park. Clean, empty, sterile, except today. There was a man on the far bench, brown, cargo pants, faded, HOA windbreaker. Elias Vero, architectural chair. He looked up, nodded. Not indifference. Not loyalty to Marilyn either. Guilt. The community board caught my eye. New flyer, community alert, dire red occupant, property 39. Do not assist during reassignment review. My name right on the board where kids used to pin lemonade stand coupons. I tore it down. When I got home, the biometric lock was dead. I overrode it using backup hardware, a little insurance from when Orrin used to panic during storms. Inside was too quiet. His shoes were gone. His cup wasn't on the counter. The astrolabe pedestal was empty. I checked my office sandboxed firmware, still running Clubhouse Shelter Node Live. No audio, no camera, just a heartbeat, ping, slow, steady. That was Orrin. I taught him how to breathe even during sensor scans, playing hide-and-seek with drones. He was calm, waiting for me. And I'd get him not with a lawyer, but by dismantling the system they trusted, every clause they forgot to update, every firmware they failed to patch. When I finished, Crimson Hollow wouldn't just be exposed, it would be erased from the registry that gave Marilyn her power. I came back at dusk. The square's edges softened in the fading light, but underneath nothing changed. Perfect hedges, porch lights in rows, everyone inside their boxes, faces blue from compliance notifications. Elias was still on that bench. I approached quietly, slipped into the blind spot. "You're not supposed to be in the square," he said. "I'm tier red." "I'm not supposed to exist," I replied, sitting beside him. He exhaled almost a laugh. "That's not how it works." "No," I said, "but that's how they want it to feel." Silence hung between us. Then he spoke. "I didn't know they'd take him. I signed off on escalation, but the shelter clause, that wasn't the plan." "What plan?" He flinched. "Containment, restrict, tech, cut you off until you complied. Soft siege." I let it hang. "Clause 13F is void," I asked. He looked away. "She said it was just a placeholder, wouldn't escalate." "But it did." "You watched it happen," I said. "I built systems like yours. Years ago, I know what a shelter ping looks like. I've got a log in my panel that catches the beacon every time she opens the door." Elias stiffened. He didn't ask how I had access. "You're not just a data guy, are you?" he said. "No," I answered. He rubbed his mouth. "She documents everything, minutes, signatures." I handed him the flyer. "Look at the footer." His brow furrowed. "Approved by board vote," he muttered. But there was no vote. "It's auto-filled." "She's spoofing approvals," I said. He looked sick. "I just wanted this place safe, tech transparency. I didn't sign up for a bunker with a child in it." "But now you're in it," I said. "And you're the only one who can get into that clubhouse without triggering a lockdown." He looked scared. "She'll bury me." "Maybe," I said, "or maybe you'll decide whether this place becomes a headline." He didn't say yes, but he didn't leave. I stood, leaving the flyer. Behind me, sprinklers shut off. The man on the bench was cracking. I didn't need an army, just one engineer who stopped making excuses. Next morning, the clubhouse windows were tinted. Marilyn had initiated lockdown, scared of the optics, a parent outside the gate yelling about his missing kid. She'd want to tighten the script. So I gave her a reason to improvise. Parked outside, walked in on footgate scanner, chirped red. I wanted it to. Maintenance staff, radioed board assistant appeared. "Mr. Draven, you've been advised." I held up a drive. "Delivering compliance materials." She blinked, then handed it to Marilyn. "That's the escalation I needed." 15 minutes later, notice $3,500 fine for unauthorized device transfer. Compliance hearing scheduled for Friday. Perfect. That drive was a firmware echo trap, logging shelter access, returning timestamps to my server. 14 unique pings from the maintenance door under the clubhouse, all signed by Marilyn. She was keeping it off the books, but secrets leave footprints. I cross-referenced violations: child custody transfer under invalid HOA clause, underground facility with firmware leaks, falsified documents. My model lit green. This qualified for dormant enforcement. Crimson Hollow never filed their infrastructure update. Their firmware stack wasn't certified any abuse, especially with the minor triggers of federal shutdown. I didn't have to call the police, just trip the wire. Back in my lab, I calibrated everything, drive still pinging, more fingerprints, more evidence. 5 new pings, all from Sub-Level A Shelter 1, originally a climate control chamber, but specs matched FEMA bunkers. They'd repurposed it. The firmware vendor wasn't certified, meaning every act was in violation of the Communication Safeguard Act, not just a FINA shutdown order. I bundled everything, sent it up through an old oversight server. Wasn't about revenge, it was about protocol. While it compiled, I ran a trace. Orange signal shifted. They were moving him. Not carefully either. He was struggling. I stood so fast my chair fell over. The trigger was sent. Enforcement would be inbound within 48 hours, but I couldn't wait. I grabbed my field bag, signal repeaters, shielding tiles, and uplink beacon, the last working tap node from agency days. Illegal. So was holding a child in a shelter with no guardian. We were even. Before I left, I checked for the astrolabe gone. I'd seen it in a maintenance feed on the shelter console beside a folded blanket like a museum exhibit. I closed the drawer. Didn't need the astrolabe to find my son. I had better maps. Elias's workshop was behind his unit, tucked between the retaining wall and a dry canal. No cameras, no HOA sensors, just a steel door. I knocked. He opened up, resigned, not scared. "You tapped the relay?" I asked. He nodded. "Green solid," he said. "Then it's real." He pulled out old blueprint stage B deferred project status. A fake permit, a blank on the plans. She'd buried the shelter inside a false deferment. "You said she moved him. How do you know heartbeat echo data?" I said signal shifted. She told me tier red households lose custody if signal logs are incomplete. She could fabricate a tier red orphan scenario. My hands curled into fists. She doesn't have that authority. "She thinks she does," he replied. He handed me a black fob. "Interior panel manual override. They don't know I have a copy." I took it. "If you succeed, the board collapses. And if I fail, you still force the truth into daylight." We weren't allies, just 2 guys who stopped lying to themselves. I left with the fob. Crimson Hollow was quiet, but someone had built a cage on stolen authority, and I had the only key that mattered. The clubhouse lot was dark. Unregistered sensor domes on the roof, heat diffusers, not on filings. The side entrance was tucked beneath a false panel. The fob bypassed it, no alarm shelter running on its own sub-circuit isolated. I stood in the dark air, too sterile for storage. The corridor sloped down, lined with noise-absorbing panels. 2 turns, sealed door right where Elias said. The panel blinked amber. I activated my repeater node, recording, echoing, uploading the illegal firmware in real time. Tagged Marilyn's credentials. I stepped inside. 3 narrow rooms, glass walls soundproofed. 1 empty, 1 storage. The last had a cot, a desk, a single chair. Oren sat there, hunched, spinning the astrolabe. He didn't look up. "You're late," he whispered. My throat nearly gave out. "I'm here." She said I couldn't take it with me. "You will." He looked up, eyes wide and too old for 10. "Did she break the law?" "She broke everything I said." A quiet click behind me. Marilyn, clipboard blazer, expression calm. "You've made a mistake," she said. "No, you did. Clause 13F was revoked. Your board never ratified the charter. Your firmware vendor lost compliance. The biometric system just reported a juvenile custody breach to federal oversight." She blinked. "Crack. You're bluffing." "Repeaters live," I said, pointing to the blinking node. "Your logs, credentials, non-compliant firmware uploaded." She stepped forward, trying to talk me down. "I can still, you can't. Packet was sent last night, enforcement inbound. This facility is about to be audited and flagged as illegal detainment." Behind her footsteps. Elias, tablet in hand, live camera feed. "This is over," he said. And it was. "Let's go," I whispered to Orrin. He stood still, shaking eyes, never leaving Marilyn as we left. We walked out. Elias led us through a hidden hall off the cameras. HOA's obsession with control had created its own escape routes. We emerged into the night air thick with sage and static. No words. Orrin gripped the astrolabe like it was the only thing holding the world together. As we walked home, I realized Elias had uploaded the footage. Orrin in the chair, the bolted cot, the spinning astrolabe straight to the resident portal. By morning, every house would see it. The firmware repeater was still running a full audit, every login, every lock command, even Marilyn's voice digitizing her own confession. Once home, Orrin paused in the hallway. Did they know what she was doing? Some did, most didn't. But no one stopped her. Why? Because when people are afraid to break rules, they stop asking who wrote them. Can I keep it in my room? It never left, I said. Elias stood by the door. She'll call it a misunderstanding, he said. She can try, but she can't wipe the logs. The rewrite was never finalized. 4 signatures, none from residents. No legal authority. He looked deflated. You going to bring her down, Gnome? The board. And let the residents decide what comes next. And me. Depends on whether you show up with the blueprints and the fob. He handed it over. At 4:03 a.m., the repeater node went silent. Marilyn found it, tried to purge, but the logs had already synced to backup. The HOA hearing was set for 6:30 a.m. By the time I arrived, residents were already gathering, some in robes, some in polos. One woman in scrubs holding her badge and coffee like a shield. Marilyn at the table, gray suit, no badge, no words. I dropped the binder legal charter. This is the charter you've been using, never passed. Every designation, every fine, every detainment since last August void. Silence. This report includes firmware logs from a facility that doesn't exist and disclosures accessed 14 times in 48 hours personally by Marilyn. Elias stepped up. She held a child under a revoked clause. Called it corrective containment. It was illegal. The floor plan spread across the table. Sub-level A never filed, never approved. Used to hold my son. No one defended her. The footage had already reached everyone. The vote was called removal of President Cordwin. Not even close. The badge was removed. No one clapped. This wasn't a celebration, it was a correction. I spoke anyway. You built a system on silence. Don't be surprised when someone finally answers back. You turned policy into punishment. You used a clause you had no right to enforce. You counted on my silence. But silence is a choice, and I chose to end it. Outside, Orrin waited, spinning the astrolabe. It's over, he asked. Almost. What happens now? They'll rebuild. Will we stay long enough to make sure it doesn't happen again? He handed me the astrolabe. You keep it, just until I stop waking up scared. The next morning, 2 unmarked sedans, county vehicle, civil oversight officer Rennick. No raid, no drama, just a sealed envelope and a small black device. Marilyn didn't resist. She was undone by her own blueprint. The compliance blackout reset. Every lock wiped her credentials, disabled the tier system for review. I watched from the playground shade, remembering Orrin asking if the benches were bolted down so his mom's ghost could sit on one. A few residents gathered, people fined for wind chimes or garden hoses who'd kept their heads down. No one defended Marilyn as she was removed. She wasn't a leader, just a liability now. I pulled down every tier red status sheet, every compliance warning, every list with my name in red. Elias joined me. She's gone. Now it starts, I said. No more invisible clauses. No more tier classifications. You're the one to build that. I signed off on half the old system, he said. Then you're the only one qualified to keep it from happening again. When I left, he stayed behind looking at the empty board, maybe for the first time seeing it as a clean slate. 2 weeks passed. No new notices, no threats about grass or shade. The square benches got replaced with wood, not uniform, just benches. One read, "For those who were silenced, right where Orrin had been taken." Elias became interim chair. No protest. No one else even nominated. He asked me to help rewrite the charter. I declined. This was Orrin's home now, not mine. Orrin adjusted slow. Didn't want to ride his bike, kept the nightlight on.